I've been a U2 fan since probably the early '80s, and the Rattle and Hum and several other albums were fantastic. Joshua Tree. My favorite is still Live at Red Rocks, which came out, I believe, like '82, '83. First time I remember talking about it. The reason I'm bringing that up is that when I was thinking about this podcast, I started thinking about the very beginning of Sunday Bloody Sunday on that album, because Bono is popular or famous for saying at the beginning of it, there's been a lot of talk, way too much talk about this next song. Well, on this particular subject today, there's been a lot of talk. There's been way too much talk about cold water immersion or ice baths. And though there's been a lot of studies, the studies are pretty much inconclusive at the moment. Still needs to have more research done on this particular subject. But the reason I thought it warranted a podcast is, besides the anti-inflammatory benefits of cold water immersion and anti-stress and some other factors, we now have evidence of fat loss through cold water immersion today on the Personal Age Fitness Podcast. Good day and welcome to the Personal Age Fitness Podcast. My name is Garrett Williamson. I'm president of Personal Age Fitness. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, and thank you so much for those that are following the show and regular listeners. As always, before I dive into this topic, pun intended, talking about cold water immersion, I want to let you know how to get in touch with the show if you have any questions about this subject or any others, or as always, where we get some of our best ideas. If you have any questions for concerning dispelling the myths of health, fitness, and wellness, please contact us at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also reach me at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com, which is my email address. That's also our website, personaledgefitness.com, and our Facebook page, Personal Age Fitness. If you're so inclined, hit me up on Twitter at TeamPE. This subject of cold water immersion has it's kind of ebbed and flowed. Believe it or not, this is something that I read about. Actually, have done myself when this was really saw some major popularity about I would say about 5 or 6 years ago, if I remember correctly. I think it was before. So probably about about 6 years ago, prior to my 2016 competition at the World Championships in Cozumel. I had been reading a lot about cold water immersion, and I was doing a lot of workouts, and I was actually using ice baths in my training. And I have to tell you, I'm not sure if I saw a tremendous benefit from it. I actually had a good race, and it seemed to me to help my performance. I have to tell you, after getting out of that ice bath, I felt very relaxed, very calm. And so it's part of the reason I probably kept doing it was because of how I felt afterwards. And there was some studies out there talking about the anti-inflammatory benefits and recovery associated with ice baths, or cold water baths. And it kind of stands to reason, because we use ice for therapy, and you have used ice for therapy for years for reducing inflammation. There's also a very popular technique of using cold and hot, like a heat compress and then ice, to stimulate circulation. When you do that, when you keep putting cold on an area for, say 15 minutes or so, then you use heat, and then you use cold again, and you fluctuate between the two of them, you're actually stimulating circulation. And I'm a big fan of course, stimulating circulation. I've talked about that in many podcasts on a variety of subjects, talking about increasing circulation and how you actually feel better when you increase circulation, because you're getting more oxygenated blood around the body and throughout the body, and oxygen equals energy. We've talked about that before, and so that's probably why I had that very relaxed, very calm, stress relief feeling of after doing those ice baths. The reason I wanted to do this podcast today was the ice baths have kind of come back in vogue. Not that they really went out, but they've gotten very popular, and one of the benefits that I've heard touted was dealt with fat loss. Well, 72% of the people that come to see us come for fat loss. They come for weight loss, but they're basically looking for fat loss. So anything in that area, I'm always highly attuned to. I'm very interested in finding out more about it. And so besides the companies that are selling the ice bath dunking tanks, making the claims, I wanted to see if there was some research on the fat loss benefits with cold immersion therapy, and turns out there are, and there's actually several of them, and but I said at the beginning of this that then I'll hopefully say at the end also is that there's still some research going on, and there's still more research that's needed for this, but I thought there was enough out there to at least cover the topic, and I've been asked about it a few times, so I thought that we would cover it today on the show and talk a little bit about it. The benefits of cold water immersion actually go back many years. They were, believe it or not, they were touted as far back as Hippocrates. Hippocrates actually touted the benefits of cold water plunge or cold water immersion. Another person closer to home, though a good ways back in history, is Thomas Jefferson. He was a proponent of the benefits of cold immersion therapy, and so it's something that's been around for a long time. There are other countries and communities, therefore, also that have touted the benefits of cold immersion therapy. The Scandinavian countries, it's very popular. It's something has been done for years. There are arguments being made that benefits are being seen by this, and one of the reasons we're seeing more benefits or evidence to more benefits is the fact that these cold water swim teams, these cold water swimming organizations have grown tremendously because of the way people are feeling after they get out of the water. And I think doing a polar bear plunge on January 1 may be a little different. The popularity of that may have more to do with the celebration of the new year and possibly alcohol, and just a party atmosphere. But regular athletes that are joining these polar bear clubs, and when they're doing cold water swimming, is actually booming and growing. It's not a short-term fad. It seems to be growing quite a bit. I ran into some of these individuals when I was in Vancouver. I was racing in 2017 in Penticton, Canada, and I actually traveled to Vancouver and spent a day or so there. And on the way back out of Penticton, spent another day or so in Vancouver. And just down from the Airbnb where I was staying, there was a large body of water and a group that met every single morning and went swimming out there. And so I actually went out and joined them. I joined them for a morning swim and also an afternoon swim out there. And I was not knowing that I was going to do this podcast, so that was back in 2017. Of course, I was just curious about it and was asking the members about how many people come out, and is this a regular? There were about 15 to 20 people out there, and they did it. They did it every single morning. And I was curious if this was a large group, was it a small group, was it a special occasion? Had they seen their numbers grow, or was this something they just recently started? And they said they've been doing it for years, and actually the group had grown, and gone out and done this cold water swimming. Vancouver has plenty of indoor pools and heated pools and what have you. And these individuals are actually taking advantage of the cold water swimming. So I've seen some of this with my own eyes. Let me talk real quickly about the anti-inflammatory effects of this. And it does make sense that of course it's simple and kind of common sense to understand that you're going to have somewhat of an anti-inflammatory response if you have inflammation and you add cold to it. That's quite obvious to understand you're going to have that. But the main reason why we have an anti-inflammatory benefit from cold immersion is deals with what I was talking about a minute ago, and that's increasing her circulation. We talk about increasing circulation when we talk about recovery. When somebody's sore, let's say they do a heavy leg workout and their legs are really, really sore. Some people want to stretch them, and we've even had people talk about we're doing another workout with their legs, and we actually advise them not to work the legs and let them recover. The soreness that they're feeling is actually the recovery process, but what speeds recovery is speeding circulation. And if you're a fan of the show, you've probably heard me talk about I firmly believe they're doing so much research in recovery, and we're recovering faster now because of this research. And I argue that we will get so good at recovery and actually working on a recovery, increasing circulation, that we'll be able to fully break down a muscle, I predict. And then 24 hours later, the muscle will be completely repaired and we can break it down again. Now, I don't know that's going to happen, but the way that we're speeding up the recovery process, I think that's definitely going to happen. So what we typically tell people is to do something to increase their circulation. Go for a walk. Do some light cardio. Anything to get moving. And and you've seen this before, if you have any kind of aches and pains, especially in the lower back. Typically when I have people that have lower back pain, they say, I get it in the first thing in the morning, but then after I get up and I get moving, I feel better. Well, of course you feel better because you have circulation that has started and you start reducing inflammation. Therefore, the pain starts going away. So there's signs, there's studies. I'm not talking a whole lot about that today in this particular podcast, but there's studies that have shown that rheumatoid arthritis patients that do cold water immersion are feeling effects and have reported that they have less pain. And that stands to reason because a lot of arthritis generates a lot of inflammation. And so we knock down that inflammation, you're going to feel a little bit better. There's also been some studies talking about brain function and cold water therapy. There's studies that have showed that immersion therapy and cold water immersion therapy has shown to help fight the causes of degenerative brain diseases like dementia. So and I've read the studies, I've looked at them, and they're a little too technical. I don't want to go down that road too much today, but I would be an advocate of that because again, I'm an advocate for increasing circulation, reducing stress. If you're doing both of those things, you're going to help the brain. So I can see where there's definitely some benefits there, and there's even others that I won't go into today about blood pressure, about stress relief, about depression, that deal with cold water therapy. So I believe that they're going to continue. I'm sure they're going to continue studying this particular phenomenon, and I bet some of these findings are going to hold true. They're going to stand up to the studies with all the different benefits that they're talking about and the simple science of increasing circulation through cold water immersion. I would not be surprised if we see some of these benefits. But the one I wanted to focus on today was the one that really grabbed my attention, and that was that I had not seen before, and that is talking about fat loss associated with cold immersion therapy. Ice baths, a lot of people call these. The different studies. In fact, there's one piece of literature that I was reading that had summarized 104 different studies, and kind of gathered all that information together. Some of it was done with gender specific, so it was only done with men, or some of it was done with high-end athletes, some of it was done with average Joes, but they kind of compiled all of this information and started drawing some simple conclusions out of it, still stating that some of these were short-term, there were 6, 8, 9 weeks, or maybe they were small group samples. The one I'm going to talk about today actually had 22 people in it. But there's rising evidence, I guess you should say, that we've got some benefit to this. Now, what's going on in the study that the quote was actually, I don't want to butcher this individual's name. I have to use my cheat sheet here and actually read it. I do know the spelling, but it makes it a little easier to look at it. But Dr. Takashi Yonashiro, I hope I'm getting that right. And Dr. Yonashiro, if you happen to hear me butchering your name, please forgive me. But Dr. Takashi Yonashiro of the University of California, San Francisco, in their diabetes center, did a study talking about or dealing with or looking at what we call brown fat and brown fat activation associated with ice water therapy or immersion therapy. Now, it's obvious that Dr. Yonoshiro, I hope I'm getting that right, or Yonoshiro, either way, I can understand being associated with the Diabetes Center of the University of California, San Francisco. It stands to reason that he would be investigating this because, as you've heard me talk about in the live food, I talk about the number one killer, that diabetes, the number one cause of diabetes is obesity. So anybody studying diabetes or trying to help control diabetes is going to be looking at fat loss, obviously. And just for those that don't remember, the definition, the actual definition of obesity is a male who has body fat that is 25% of his body weight or higher, or a female that has body fat that's 30% of their total weight or higher. Forget about BMI. You know BMI is worthless. I got a whole podcast about that. Don't worry about BMI. BMI does not correctly address obesity. It is a guesstimate. Quit using BMI. It's worthless, and I won't go on with that. But anyway, but the body fat percentages I told you a minute ago, 25 or higher for a male, 30 or higher for a female is the actual definition of obesity. And anybody in a diabetic center working on combating diabetes, of course, is going to be looking to tap that down. But I mentioned something a minute ago, which is brown fat. Let me see if I can explain that to you. It's pretty common knowledge or commonly accepted that if it comes to FAT, you don't want any of that anywhere near you. I understand that. Jerry Seinfeld did a bit on that, talking about that's got fat in it. What's the fat content? It's fat. If I eat fat, it's going to be in me. We don't like fat. Fat's bad. Well, fat is not actually bad at all, especially not brown fat. Now, most of the fat that you're concerned with, if you're gaining around your stomach or gaining around your hips, or, I've got too much fat, I've got to get this off, that's white fat. That's known as white fat. And that would be, to keep this simple, let's just call that's the bad fat. We're going to have a little bit on us no matter what, but when we get to those higher levels, higher percentage levels, that's what we don't want in our system. Brown fat's different. And the reason it's called brown fat is that brown fat is packed with heavily packed with mitochondria. And mitochondria is let's just say it's the brain of the cells. And that's what actually gives it its somewhat brown-looking color. And you're actually born with quite a bit of this. Babies are born with a lot of it between their shoulder blades because they don't have the ability to shiver. And so the brown fat actually helps keep them warm. And that shiver, that will come into play in just a second. So brown fat or brown adipose tissue, commonly referred to as BAT, brown adipose tissue, does have this mitochondria in it. And it's good because when that mitochondria activates, it causes your body to expend energy, to turn fuel into energy and use energy. Well, why is that important? Well, as I've talked about before, I talk about calories. Stay with me here. I'm going to get to the whole energy thing. A calorie, you know of calories because you know if calories are in food, and you want to make sure you have enough calories to be able to accomplish all your activities, but you don't have too many calories because if you take in too many calories, that's what ends up causing white fat and causing excess energy stores, which is fat, in our body. But a calorie also is a measurement of heat. It's actually a measurement of energy. And so it's known as a calorie, or what we call a kilocalorie. And so that is a measurement of heat. And I talked about in my water episode about how drinking water actually burns fat. And the way it does that is if you drink colder than body temperature water, and that's pretty much all the water you ever drink unless you heat it up on the stove or heat it up on your dashboard. Every bit of water you drink is colder than 98.6 degrees. I hope I got that right. I know which is body temperature. So any water that you drink that's cold, as it goes into your system, your body warms up that water. It's no different than taking a metal plate that's really, really hot and tilting it, and then pouring water on the high end and letting it run down the other end. If you pour cold water on the high end, when it comes off on the low end, running across that hot metal, then it's going to be warm. Obviously, if you pour cold water at the top of it, it runs across hot metal. When it comes off the bottom, it's going to be warm. Well, what you're experiencing there is a heat exchange. Some of the heat transferred from that metal to the water, and actually that metal now will be a bit colder. Well, that heat exchange is calories. You're pouring cold water across hot metal, and the heat exchange is it's losing calories. The metal is losing calories, and so you're causing it to burn calories. That is the same process. When we talk about got to get into a good cardio session, burn some calories, that's what we're doing. You're expending energy. You're burning calories, and whether you're pouring something cold on something hot to burn calories, or you're activating your muscles so that they use energy, which burns calories, it's the same caloric burn. Now, when we get back to what we were talking about a minute ago, about the brown fat, well, the brown fat, when it starts to activate those mitochondria, like I said a minute ago, it causes your body to start burning energy, to actually expending energy. All right, what's that got to do with cold immersion? Well, cold immersion puts your body into somewhat of a panic mode. Pardon me for saying it that way, but that's basically what it's doing. It puts it into a fight or flight mode. It is all of a sudden you're surrounding yourself. It's just like walking outside with no clothes on when it's really cold, and you start to shiver. Your body reacts. Your body reacts by, okay, I've got to warm up this body. I've got to maintain this body temperature. And the first thing that it does is your body starts to release epinephrine. It's norepinephrine. Excuse me. I want to get that hormone incorrect. It's norepinephrine. It starts to release. Well, when it releases norepinephrine, the brown fat has hormone receptors. Norepinephrine is a hormone, and when those hormone receptors sense that norepinephrine, they crank up that mitochondria and get that mitochondria burning calories, burning that excess those excess calories burning heat, trying to warm the body. And this is where they're starting to find a relationship between cold immersion therapy and actually losing body fat. And I found it interesting, and it makes sense to me. And the reason it makes sense to me is because of what I've talked about with my water talk about drinking cold water and how that actually does burn calories. That's not even, there's plenty of studies on that, but you don't even need a study for that. You can think about the analysis that I just told you about the metal sheet, the sheet of hot metal. That is widely known that drinking a cold liquid, whatever, will actually burn calories. Something I've talked about for years. So if we're immersing the body into a cold atmosphere, and the studies that Dr. Yonashira did, they actually took athletes and had them sleep in cold rooms. They had 3 different groups, and one group slept in a really cold room. A control group slept in a typical normal temperature room, and another group, another variable group, actually slept in something that was just slightly colder. I can give you the temperatures. There's around 68 degrees, and then they went down as low as like 40, 50 degrees when they were doing this. And this was a double-blind study, and what that means is that the instructors didn't know who was sleeping in which room. The control group, the variable groups, did not know what temperature they were sleeping in or what have you. And that's called a double-blind study. And they did this for several weeks. They noticed that the control group basically stayed the same, which is what you expect. The slightly colder room did have a different and increased fat loss as compared to the control group, and those that slept in even the colder room had more fat loss than the other two. It turns out that when we first started doing cold immersion, we were doing it originally for anti-inflammatory and what have you, and people were doing cold water baths that were 15, 20, 30 minutes. I remember being in on a regular basis 20 minutes in a bath. But it turns out now they're finding that cold immersion or ice immersion therapy, you see benefits and from shorter term exposure. More exposures during a week, but shorter term exposures, and they're talking 3 to 6 minutes. The recommendations I've seen so far, I've not seen one go higher than 6 minutes into ice therapy. I've not found the reason for this except that possibly this could deal with circulation, but they're saying that more of an upright position instead of a lounging position, and up to your neck, basically immersing the body into cold water. This is where they're seeing these benefits. There's a very popular wellness regimen, I guess you'd say, kind of a New Year's resolution type wellness regimen. And I know of people that have done this and had great success with it. It's a gimmick, like my rubber bands on my water bottle. It's a gimmick, but it's called 75 Strong. And one of the things that you do in 75 Strong, besides making sure you're drinking enough water during the day, there's mental wellness, because they actually have you reading 10 pages a day, and then following any kind of controlled diet a day. But one of the things they have you do is take a 5-minute cold shower, and you do this for 75 days. Now, everybody that I know that have actually done it have seen incredible benefits. Now, the benefits from that particular program are, of course, in the diet and the water and all of it. But the reason they're recommending the cold water is twofold. They're recommending it to helping you deal with stress, because the stress of actually taking a 5-minute cold shower is very difficult. But it's one of those, if you can conquer that, you can kind of conquer anything. There's a lot of mental effects to it. But the other reason is dealing with this thermogenic effect of the brown fat being activated, the mitochondria being activated, and expending and burning those calories. This is also related to, you've heard this before, the thermogenic effects of certain foods. And one of the thermogenic the thermogenic foods are like hot peppers. They talk about those as being a thermogenic food, ones that actually help you burn fat. And the reason for that is something in it called capsaicin. Well, and there's some great studies on that. I'm not going to do a study. I'm not going to talk about that. I might talk about that in a future podcast about capsaicin or thermogenic foods. But that is the same principle. That thermogenic effect through taking in certain foods for burning fat, that's the same principle. Activating that brown fat or brown adipose tissue, and firing up those mitochondria, and actually burning those extra calories. Well, actually, obviously there's some things to take into consideration. There's risk involved, obviously, with ice therapy. Hypothermia, pretty obvious. You stay in there too long, you can become hypothermic. I'm talking about 3 of my races today, but New Zealand was the coldest race that I'd ever competed in, and this was in 2012. Yeah, 2012. Competed in New Zealand and actually did 2 races down there. It's the only time I ever dual qualified for Team USA to represent Team USA at the Worlds, and I did the sprint triathlon and I did the aquathlon. And doing the course familiarization, I'm wearing a full wetsuit, and I have a swim cap on and a hood on top of that. I swam all of, maybe 300, 400 yards at the most in the acclimation in 52-degree water. And got out and was running sideways, literally, because my inner ear had been affected by the cold, and found out that I should have been wearing earplugs, and whew, that was a heck of an effect. Well, if I'd stayed in there too long, hypothermia was definitely something you need to be concerned with. Vasoconstriction. Okay, obviously. You may stimulate circulation, but immediate immersion in cold water is going to cause vasoconstriction. This can be problematic for individuals with any kind of cardiovascular conditions. Anybody with a heart condition, the shock of this could cause problems. So, an immune system. I honestly think there's some benefits to the immune system through cold water therapy, but the immune system can be affected. Why? Because if you're cold and you stay cold and you don't warm up afterwards, well, you can develop a cold. You can develop lower your immune resistance, especially if you've you're really tired after a workout and your immune system's overworking trying to repair your muscles, and then you go into cold water and you don't warm up very well afterwards, yeah, you can easily get sick. And there's possibly some others that are out there, so I would be careful in doing this. And if you're going to get into it, look at a few things. First thing is duration. If you've never done it before, immerse yourself in it for about 50, 60 degrees for a very short amount of time. Get used to it. Slowly get used to it. For fat loss, they recommend 2 to 3 times a week. I recommend doing short bouts for more days, and then start to slowly increase the time in those bouts. So I've had people do ice baths all the way up to 15 minutes, if not more. Again, the ones that I'm seeing recommended are 3 to 6 minutes, but they're 3 to 4 days a week doing these. So, and as always, in anything new like this, I'm going to tell you, consult your physician, especially if you have any pre-existing conditions, before you were to dive into, pun intended again, into cold immersion therapy. There's still a lot more to study about this. I'm quite certain, but I did think that it warranted a podcast because of it's kind of this much smoke. There's got to be fire. There's the numerous studies that I reviewed as far as the benefits of cold water therapy is why I think that I would definitely recommend checking it out, starting to investigate it. I will follow up as more studies come out and talk about it again, but I believe cold immersion therapy could be one more way that we help you find your level of wellness. Listen, if you have any questions about this or podcast or any others, please reach out to me at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. If you have any questions also for Ask Katie, you can reach out to me at Garrett, Garrett, at personalizedfitness.com, which is our website and Facebook page, and contact me on Twitter at @TeamP if you are so inclined. Something I'm definitely going to be putting back into my routine is something you might want to check out, cold immersion therapy. Listen, tune in for the next podcast. I look forward to speaking with you then. Thank you so much for joining me today. Everybody have a good day.